Good evening, folks. Thanks for coming in. I know we're a couple of minutes late, as usual, but we're still here. We're just seeing to the little one, make sure she was settled. And so, anyways, good evening and welcome to night one of our Witch Week. All week we're going to be 5 different lives, just talk about witches in general, witch trials. And then we're going to round off on Saturday night with not one, not two, but 3 witches on our panel. One of which is a team member already, and 2 are soon to be team members. So that'll round off the week quite nicely. But I hope everybody's safe and well. And so, as I say, let's get started. So witchcraft has been about for centuries, not just in the UK, but Europe, all over the world. Witchcraft has been everywhere, basically. During the Middle Ages, etc., there was no actual law, there was no actual acts passed by Parliament against witchcraft, so witches were usually dealt with within their own community. I forgot to say hi to everybody. Hi Sam, Steve, Nobs, hope you're doing well. Imagine me forgetting to say hello to folk, that's terrible, isn't it?
I know, how long have you been doing this?
Oh, years. No years. Anyway, there was no individual act passed by Parliament during the Middle Ages, it's up until the 16th century, so witches were basically dealt with within their own community by the local authorities, and 9 times out of 10 that meant, execution. But in 1563, well, the first scare came in 1590, which I'll just touch on briefly, by King James, who had, I'll just say, a wee encounter at sea with a storm. That's going to be covered in another night. So he kind of started the ball rolling, the whole fear of witchcraft. 3 years later, in 1563, Parliament eventually passed the Witchcraft Act. How's it? Linda, did I see Gillian's name there as well?
Don't think so.
Hey Linda, thanks for coming in, Doc. Parliament passed the Witchcraft Act, which made it a capital crime for anybody to practice witchcraft. And I know the same year Scotland passed the same act, but theirs was a bit harsher. England's act did not allow the torture of witches, but Scotland, what did I say? I'm doing well. I'm really getting this kicked off well this week, innit? England, I'll start again. England's act did not allow torture of witches to get a confession, whereas Scotland's act allowed the torture. Scotland also added on that it was a capital crime for anybody to speak with a witch, to consult with a witch. Any contact with a witch was considered a capital crime as well. Now, the Witchcraft Act came after the Reformation in 1560 was passed. So it all kind of happened around about that time. Parliament sort of sat up and took notice, what's going on in our country with all these witches. We need to do something, basically, about it. So in Scotland, there was 4 major witch trials in Scotland. Obviously, in England there was more, but in Scotland there was 4. The first one came in 1597 between March and October. Approximately 400 people were accused of witchcraft and executed. The next one was 1628 to 1631. And in 1649 to 1650, unfortunately, there's no figures for the amount of people who were accused during these 2. But the last one was 1661 to 1662, and it's estimated around 664 people over 4 counties were all arrested, tried, and executed for witchcraft, basically. Hi, Andy. Thanks for coming in, and there's Laura in as well. So, we're filling up a bit. We're getting there.
Mm-hmm.
The witchcraft trials were dealt with by what was called secular courts. There was 2 kind of courts. There was a circuit court and the court of judiciary. So this is where the trials were held. There's Shelley. Shelley's turned up eventually,
Yep.
but, she's here. So that's the main thing. Hi, Shelley. Hope you're well. 75% of the people who were accused were women. The general thinking behind it is women were, no offence to women, but they were easier targets. And unfortunately, a lot of these women were just, they were elderly women, faith, hair peelers, etc., things like that. But if your face didn't fit, then you were accused of being a witch. It was quite common for your relatives to be accused along with you. Your husband, son, daughter. So during that time, there was a lot of men and children accused. And unfortunately, the thing was, once you were accused of witchcraft, it was very, very hard to clear your name.
Mm-hmm.
You were more or less, that was it, you were condemned. So roughly about 90 out of every 100 people accused were ended up at the stake. There was two methods of execution. England had a different one from Scotland. England's way was hanging, but going back to the Tudor times, Henry, he passed a brief witchcraft bill, which didn't last very long, and where witches were burned, but see, that didn't last very long. So after the Witchcraft Act was brought out in 1563, England opted for hanging the witches, whereas Scotland burned them. The belief in burning the witch was basically to get rid of, consume the body by fire, cleansing the person of their sins, so maybe guarantee entry into heaven. This was their kind of belief back then.
Was it actually?
That's why they burned the bodies, cleansing by fire.
Oh, right.
England, they hung the witches. The witches were left to hang for an hour. After that, they were brought down and the bodies were burned. So basically, England done the kind of same as Scotland, but in a sort of roundabout way. They hung them first and then burned them.
Right.
Unfortunately, back in those days, you could be accused of witchcraft for many reasons. It could be for land gain. It could be for you give a love rival. If you fell out with one of your best friends, the easiest way to get shot at them was accuse them of being a witch. People done it for money, power, fame, as in the case of Matthew Hopkins, who was appointed by the king he became the Witchfinder General. He was appointed by the king to basically go out and hunt them down. But Matthew Hopkins saw this as an opportunity to make himself rich, basically, and to get sexual favours from many, many women who didn't want to end up at the end of a rope. So rather than end up at the end of a rope, they wanted to stay in Hopkins' good books. I think I would prefer a hanging than being burned. Quite right, Justin. I think being hanged. But back then, the method of hanging, this was a couple of 100 years before the drop was invented. So back then, it could take up to 20, 30 minutes for you to actually die, because you were put on basically the back of a horse and cart, or you were put on a stool and the stool was kicked away from you, and you were just basically left to hang, and you slowly strangled to death. Sometimes it could take 20, 30 minutes. Because the drop didn't come into effect until late 18th century, I think it was, where you just straight down, neck broken,
Oh, right.
But still, I think I would have preferred hanging to burning, to be honest.
Well, aye, because if you get burned, you would be just tied there and starting to you'd still be alive and your flesh and that was burning. Oh,
aye, wouldn't be very nice,
No thanks.
Nice. And so after you were accused of witchcraft in Scotland, you could be tortured to drag you confess. The torture could carry on for days until you just kind of gave up and admitted it. In England, you were not allowed to be tortured. The only time you were allowed to be tortured in England was if you had confessed to something. As soon as you were arrested, if you confessed to it but refused to name your accomplices, you were allowed to be tortured then. So, you can understand it was a bit of a mixed up time. It wasn't a good time to be unpopular back then. It wasn't a good time to fall out with your neighbours or try and steal a bit of their land or something, because that was it. You're a witch and you were gone, basically. You had no defence. There was very, 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 very not very many people acquitted of the crime. But that all changed. Comes after James VI wrote a book in the late 1600s, and he had the kind of view. He was sceptical of witchcraft, about the witch trials. he had doubts in his mind as to whether these were actually, the right way to go about it, and he was opposed to torture. So, come the 16th century, because the king was a bit of a sceptic, the scepticism grew amongst the public, and then in 1652, the Parliament started to introduce judges into the court. That's quite bright. My head's shining. Nobody wants to see my shiny dome. Hey Wayne, buddy, thanks for coming in.
Well, I looked like I didn't have any hair, so
Well, okay.
I was kind of blending in.
So in 1652, Parliament decided to install judges into the courts that were opposed to torture. And so there was fewer witch trials. The witch hunts kind of faded out. And as time grew, hi Nicole, thanks for coming in, Doll. And so as time went on, people started to study witchcraft more. They studied the witch trials, the records of the witch trials, and people started to realise that these thousands of people that had been wrongly arrested and executed were in fact innocent. We do have some facts and figures. Now, I should have said when we started, we might get some facts and figures wrong, because anybody that's tried to research the witch trials will know there's a ton of stuff. And so, if we do make the odd mistake, then we do apologise. I'm not saying everybody else is going to make mistakes during the course of the week. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Who knows? But if we do, then, well, people are used to me making mistakes anyway.
They are. But you did miss out one of the most used torture methods, and that was sleep deprivation.
Excuse me. Sleep deprivation, but that's still reportedly used today. In places, sleep deprivation, you weren't allowed to sleep for days on end, and eventually you would just give up.
I'm actually going to cover that in a minute.
Which ducking was utilised as a means of identifying witches in near the Norlock was used for witches. Right. I had to read that twice to take it in. It's quite a big comment for me, I can't take it on the one go. There was several methods of extracting confessions, Hi Steve, buddy, thanks for coming in. I liked your photograph, your updated profile picture, like the milk tray man. I quite liked that one. I saw that the other day. But there was several methods. Sleep deprivation was one. Starvation was another one. The old thumb screws. They used to use the boot as well. The boot was basically, as I say, it was a wooden boot, and your leg was placed inside it, and bits of wood were hammered inside until your leg basically turned to mush.
Ooh.
There was nothing left of your leg. A box of milk tray, Steve, would go down quite nicely. And ducking as well. There was two ways to do this. You would either tie to a chair and lowered into a lock or whatever. And if you drowned.
I'm covering this now.
Right, carry on then. Oops.
I might as well cover it now,
okay.
Since you're going on.
As you can see, we're on fire tonight, folks, again. It's Monday, but it's the start of the week. So...
Wait a second to get my picture up.
The rest of the team will do better during the week, probably.
Yeah. So this is the Witch's Well. It's just outside Edinburgh Castle's entrance, and it is a cast iron fountain, and it's called the Witch's Well. The well was put there to remember the Scottish women who were accused of witchcraft and they were executed. So it's a kind of grave thing, basically, isn't it?
A memorial.
Aye, that's the word I was looking for. So women that were being accused, like Scott said earlier, were usually skilled herbalists or women suffering mental health issues, or simply people held a grudge against them, so they pointed the finger and said, "You're a witch," basically. The only test for witchcraft at the time was quite barbaric. So the women would have their hands and feet bound together, and they would be thrown into the Norlock, which today is where Waverley Station is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if they drowned, they were innocent, and if they survived, they were witches. How barbaric is that? Over 300 women were burned at the stake where that well sits today. And by the end of the 17th century, burning witches went out of fashion. But hangings continued until 1728. And the well was commissioned in 1894. And it's got, I don't know if I can zoom this in anymore. It's got various symbols on it. It's quite nice, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. To commemorate with the witches.
And that plaque reads, "This fountain, designed by John Duncan, RSA, is near the site on which many witches were burned at the stake. The wicked head and the siren head signify that some used their exceptional knowledge for evil purposes, while others were misunderstood and wished their kind nothing but good. The serpent has the dual significance of evil and of wisdom. The foxglove spray further emphasises the dual purpose of many common objects." So it's quite a nice wee...
But anybody could be accused of being a witch. I mean, we've all heard the stories. Witches are meant to be the kind of old hag, kind of granny looking figure. That wasn't the case. Anybody, it didn't matter what your position in life was, you could be accused of being a witch. And it wasn't just used by normal people. The witchcraft was used by royalty to get rid of people as well, as in the case of Janet Douglas. Back in the 1600s, her and her brother was exiled, and so Janet decided to join them, but they were summoned before the king and they refused to go. So a warrant was issued for Janet's arrest, and she was brought to Edinburgh, and she was tried for witchcraft and trying to poison the king, which these charges were proved to be made up by the king himself, basically just to get her out the road. Janet was burned at the stake at where the witch's well is, at the bottom of the esplanade at Edinburgh Castle. So, royalty used it as well to get rid of people, because it was that kind of foolproof method of getting rid of people. And back then as well, also, if you were disabled, you were considered to be a witch. If you maybe had a club foot, maybe you had a hunchback, anything at all, a mark, deformity, a birthmark, anything like that. Thanks, Justin. Any kind of deformity, you were considered to be touched by the devil. This was also a method that they used to identify a witch. You'd be taken before the court and stripped naked, and they would have an examiner who would come in and examine your body for what they called the devil's teeth, the devil's mark. So if you were unfortunate to be born with some kind of birthmark, which thousands of people are, and you were accused of being a witch, then this was considered proof positive that you were a witch, and so that was it. You were condemned basically just for having a birthmark. Obviously, as time went on, this is when people started to realise these people aren't, touched by the devil. These people are disabled. These people have got something maybe medically wrong with them. And that's when it all started to turn about. People started to wake up. People started to realise, look, these people aren't witches. These people are just normal people. So I think it would have been quite easy to be condemned. It was very, very easy, Sam, back in that, especially like the 1600s, it was very, that seemed to be the time when the witch trials were at a frenzy. And as I say, there was lots of people out there. This is a way of making money. So they abused it. They abused the system, basically. And people, unfortunately, the public believed them. So I say Matthew Hopkins, he could go into any village and accuse 10 women of being a witch, and the rest of the village believed him. And so it was that easy to condemn as a witch. And the more witches you condemned, the more witches you executed, the more you get paid. and that unfortunately was just the way it was. But we do have some figures for you. Now, there's a total of 3,212 cases, and we only have records of 305 what the outcome of the trial was. So 205 were executed, 52 were acquitted, 27 were banished, 11 declared a fugitive, 6 were excommunicated, 2 were put to the horn, as it was called back then. Basically, they were outlawed. They were, called criminals, basically. 1 was kept in prison and 1 was publicly humiliated. So, as you can see by these figures, out of 3,200 cases, not a lot of people sort of came out well. A further 98 fled from prosecution, were never found. And as I think somebody says, lots of people probably hid away then. They probably did, Justin, especially. I think if you kind of fell out with your neighbour and you would go and hide somewhere because you would know that something was coming, So that's the basic outline of the witch trials, how it all kind of kicked off, how it started. If you get any questions, pop them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them. But as I said, there wasn't any. You didn't have to be poor to be accused of witchcraft. Lasting tells the time that Unisys is responsible for more people being hanged than in the previous 100 years. Yeah, that's right, Justin. Unfortunately, Matthew Hopkins was a kind of man. He was selfish, arrogant. He thought he was some kind of god, and he knew that if he targeted women, young women, and accused them, then he could get basically what he wanted from them, whether it be money or sexual favours, whatever, because these women would do anything to survive, basically. And so that's how he made his living. He just went from village to village, and sometimes he was summoned to different villages, somebody would have a fallout or a land dispute and they would send for Matthew Hopkins. He would come in, listen to them, and then basically accuse the person of being a witch. But as I say, you didn't have to be poor. So was accused. That's right. She was actually, Sam. You're bang on. She was accused of being a witch because she a deformity. It was a ploy by Henry VIII to have another wife. Henry was always scheming. Whenever he set his eyes on somebody new, he was always scheming how to get rid of his present wife. But you didn't have to be poor to be accused of witchcraft. You could have been high up in society. I mean, there's a case of a woman called Isabel Young. She was born 1590, and between 1590 and 1622, she was born into a wealthy family. She owned land, she had money, she had power. She was married to George Young, who was an influential landowner. And they had 4 sons, so everything was running as a success. But then, after 1622, she started to kind of fall out with people. She became aggressive, she became arrogant, she would argue with a lot of people. And these days, it could be seen as maybe dementia setting in, something like that. Obviously, back then, it was saw as something else. People started pointing the finger. She was arrested a few times, but nothing was ever proved. However, it all came to a head when January 1629, when Parliament finally, not Parliament, sorry, the court issued a warrant for her arrest, and there was 45 people testified against her. They all made statements, including her own husband, that she had tried to kill him. Some people had claimed she was a shapeshifter. Some people had claimed that she was causing, as they described it, magical harm to them after an argument. And others claimed that she was healing cattle and people. So this was seen as the devil's work. So she was arrested in January, and she was tried in Edinburgh, and she was found guilty and executed. So this was a lady who it started off in life quite wealthy. She was still wealthy when I would say it was her health. I don't know what you all reckon, but I would say it was certainly signs of some kind of mental illness setting in. And then she started to go downhill. So that's one case of that you didn't have to be poor to be a witch. Anybody could be accused of it. Nobody was above the law. I think Sarah's got another wee bit for you.
So in Edinburgh, you will find. That which is the heart of Midlothian. That's quite nice, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that marks the former entrance of the Tolbooth prison, where Edinburgh witches were held until their trials and executions. And what's that woman's name? Gellies Duncan? Don't know if I said that right. She spent a whole year there, waiting to be executed as a witch. Can you imagine that? Spending a full year in prison.
But this is what I mean. I know we're not touching on the Pendle witches this week, but I mean, take the Pendle witches for instance. Some of these were, especially Elizabeth Demdike. She was held in Lancaster Castle for months. She eventually died before she went. She went to court. So I mean, and some of these they were held for months and years. It was down to the court how long that they were actually held for. And the thing was, between when they were arrested, they could be tortured, get a confession right away, or they could be tortured and then thrown in a dungeon and left for months, years before they were actually taken before the court. But after they were taken to the court and found guilty, execution was usually carried out straight away. They were usually taken straight out. Against the case of the Pendle witches, they were taken straight outside that day, that hour, and they were hung basically in front of the courthouse. But there has been a lot of witches over the centuries. You know, you're talking, the estimation is roughly between 4,000 and 6,000. Which Justin's saying, we have the Witches of Selwood near me in Somerset. I have the book, need to read it and do some investigating. It is a fascinating subject. To be honest, I've said in quite a few lives, it's never a subject that I've been interested in. I've never actually studied it. The jails were rotten as well, full of rats. Exactly, Shelley, they were full of rats, and obviously they didn't have toilets and that in them, so you went, but you know, wherever on the floor, and if you were in there for months, and sometimes it wasn't just a case of you were there alone, you could be in with 20, 30 other people, just however many they decided to throw in the one cell. So, you know, you can imagine what it was like, but you get an image in your head what it was like. The only thing they had in Edinburgh was what they call dung barrels. And people used to go in the barrel, but just a barrel, and used to do your business in the barrel, and that was it. And then every so often the barrel was emptied.
Out the window?
No, it wasn't emptied out the window. It was a hole in the ground. It was emptied onto Castle Rock. Oh, right. And there is a legend of it, the Dung Ghost. And I know it's not related to witchcraft, but this is where the legend of the Dung Ghost comes from. The Dung Ghost is said to have been a prisoner who was held in the dungeons and decided that the best way to escape was to hide in one of the barrels. Oh. Thinking that the barrel was actually taken outside and, you know, disposed of. What he didn't know was that it was poured out of a hole in the wall atop of Castle Rock, and, you know, so he was in the barrel, they took it out, tipped it up, and you can guess what happened. So his ghost is said to be haunting the dungeons in Edinburgh Castle. Totally unrelated, I know that, but just we were talking about, you know, the state of the cells. So if you ever hear about the Dung Ghost at Edinburgh Castle. That's what they're talking to the prisoner who escaped attempt didn't actually go to plan.
Alright.
Did you know that? I thought you knew that.
No.
Edinburgh was the most famous place for taking the witches because it was Scotland's capital, and that's where the major courts were. So that's why a lot of witches were taken to Edinburgh, and they were held in Edinburgh Castle. There was also other places that they were held. I think it got to the stage that wherever they could find a space to keep them, this is where they were put there until they were brought before a court. But it certainly wasn't a good time to be unpopular. I'm just trying to see. We're reading some of this. I'll be honest with you, we are reading some of this, Chris. We have tried researching it, and the other girls who team, there's a lot of information on it. But Janet Douglas was also, that's the one I've just said, Janet Douglas.
Alright, that's a full story.
What's the full story? Sorry about this, folk. Helen Duncan was actually accused of being a witchcraft. Helen Duncan was the last Scot to be tried under the 1735. That's wrong. Why does that say 1735? Witchcraft Act.
Because did it not change after that?
Calendar-born Duncan was notorious as a schoolgirl for her dark premonitions and hysterical outbursts. Later, she claimed she could summon spirits by emitting ectoplasm from her mouth, but was later exposed and convicted as a fraud. Ectoplasm was in fact cheesecloth. In 1941, Duncan held a séance in which a dead sailor told her the HMS Barham had been sunk. Because this information had not been released to the public, Duncan was arrested and imprisoned for falsely claiming to procure spirits. Sorry I'm being quiet, guys, having serious broadband issues. There was also, there's loads of different short stories about various witches. I'm just going to tell you a couple of them, 2 or 3 of them. One's called Isabel Gowdy. In 1662, Isabel Gowdy was a housewife from Loch Loy near Nairn, way up north. And she was executed after freely confessing without being tortured, which was usual for that time.
Unusual.
It was a usual practice because what sometimes happened was, once you were arrested, you knew what was going to happen, you knew you were condemned. So rather than go through the torture,
you would just confess.
You would just confess.
Right, okay.
Because you knew what was coming. As I said earlier, as soon as you were accused of being a witch, that was basically game over. You had no defence, nothing. Very little people were. So rather than go through all that, they just pleaded guilty.
Alright.
To speed the process up, basically.
Alright.
So Isabel decided the best way was just to confess to being part of a coven of 13 that feasted with the Queen of Fairies and also had the ability to transform into animals. She also claimed to have killed a man with elf arrows and to have been raped and beaten by the devil. Gowdy's testimony is considered to be the most exceptional ever given by a witchcraft suspect in Britain. So, it is quite extraordinary what she confessed to without torture. And then you get the witches from Macbeth as well, where the old double toil and trouble comes from.
Is that where that came from?
It's a famous line was spoken by Shakespeare's witches who predicts Macbeth's rise to king and his eventual downfall. They were probably based on the Chronicle of Britain, written in 1587, which Macbeth and Banquo encounter 3 women in a strange and wild apparel, believed to be weird sister goddesses of destiny. The other famous one was called the Pitween Witches. In 1705, the Pitween Witches in the East Neuk of Fife. 16-year-old boy called Patrick Morton was accused a number of his neighbours of witchcraft. Now, no one questioned his story. One of the accused was arrested and left alone, in a dark cell for 5 months. So there you go. So that's one person. She was left in a cell, no light for 5 months herself. And another starved to death in a dungeon, while a third, Janet Cornfoot, was caught by an angry mob, which apparently included ancestors of Sir Sean Connery, who beat her, dragged her to the seafront, tied her between a ship and the shore, and stoned her to death.
That's why Chuck Stones at the minute.
It's popular in other countries, shall we say. It's called a stone. All it took was for somebody to accuse you of being a witch or doing witchcraft. It's exactly, Laura, as we're saying, it's absolutely insane the way it was back then. And unfortunately, the mentality, as in that case that I've just said there, that was a young boy, a 16-year-old boy that accused that woman, and nobody questioned the story at all. Nobody says, well, could he be telling lies? They all believed him. Such was the grip that witchcraft had on the whole country at the time. And that was 3. One died in the dungeon, one died of starvation, but a mob caught a woman and tied her to a ship and stoned her to death. Without a trial, without anything, just on the word of a 16-year-old boy. Now, can you imagine that happening today? Can you imagine somebody saying about your next door neighbour, she's a witch, and a big group going and grabbing her and doing that to her? It just wouldn't happen.
No.
But this was the mentality of what was going on back then. Then you get the case of Major Thomas Weir as well. He was born in Carluke in 1599. He was a soldier and a occultist with a reputation for I'm going to try and say this word. If I get this word wrong, then religiosity. I can't say it. Sorry, folks. I tried. I cannot say it. Now, because he lived near the top of West Bow in Edinburgh's Grassmarket, he was known as the Bowhead Saint. But in 1670, in his sickbed, Weir confessed to a secret life of vice and sorcery, along with his sister. The Major related incredible stories of meeting strangers in fiery chariots and being given supernatural intelligence. They were both tried and found guilty of witchcraft. Weir's final words before being garroted and burnt were, I have lived as a beast, I must die as a beast. That was something else that they used to do. No, it didn't happen all the time. You'd be garroted first before you were burned.
I'm going to be stupid, but it's garroted.
Garroted is basically strangulation. You were half strangled.
Oh.
Before you were tied to you were tied to the stake. You were half strangled, and then the fire was lit. On a few occasions, if you had a family member who had money, what would happen is they would pay the executioner to, instead of just kind of half strangle you, just to finish you off before they lit the fires. So you were actually dead when the fire was lit. Shall was saying, if the witch trials began in the 21st century, it would be... No, it would, Shelley, it would just be genocide, because it was just basically a massive slaughter. That's all it was. And they also had something called the witch pricking, which was, as it says, it was somebody would come in and they would have a needle, or, a sharp object, with a knife, anything, and you were stripped naked, made to stand there, and this person would basically just jab you with whatever it was that he was using. And it was deemed that if you felt no pain and if you didn't bleed, then you were a witch.
All right.
And this actually turned into an occupation. You did actually get witch prickers that travelled the country. They were actually quite in demand. It was something that anybody could do. But again, same as Matthew Hopkins, who was a fake, the witch prickers were just normal people. But for some reason, they got, a name for themselves, and, they would be sent for, people would hire them to go and stick a needle on somebody to see if they bled or if they screamed out of pain. If, that didn't happen, then you were deemed a witch and you were burned. So yet again, there was no way out. Especially Scotland was more brutal with the witches. Is your camera glitching?
I think so.
Is your camera jumping a wee bit? Can somebody tell us if your camera's jumping? Or we're jumping, sorry. Scotland seemed more brutal on witches than England did for some strange reason. I don't know if anybody's seen it here. No, I thought I'd seen it.
Looks okay to me. That was for Shelley.
Thanks, Shelley. No, must be me. I must be glitching.
Seems okay.
Everybody seemed, everybody seems okay. But get back to the witch prickers. I mean, witch prickers, they're the kind of stuff of horror films, and they were usually men with a tall hat on, dark cloak, kind of Puritan looking, and they would come to town just to terrorise helpless women, basically. But one case in Scotland in 1662, the witch pricker was actually a woman who disguised herself as a man. Her name was Christian Cadell, and she had watched one of the most famous witch prickers at work and thought, I could do that, basically. I'm going to give that a go. But there was only one problem. It was a man's job. It was considered a man's job, as were a lot of jobs back then. It was kind of man's world. So what she decided to do was dress up as a man. And she got away with it. But she eventually got caught out. And for some reason, it was termed as sexual abuse. And so she was charged with this sexual abuse and imprisoned. So, as I say, anybody could do the job. Carol saying, I just keep a few glitching. The stabbing scenes are an unreliable method because individuals have high or low pain tolerance. Plus, exactly, Laura. Yeah, as we were saying about being deformed, being disabled, stuff like that. Even only having one eye, stuff like that. As you say, all these conditions were termed as you've been touched by the devils. We are glitching.
We are.
You were touched by the devil in some way, and as Laura says there, it was an unreliable method because different people have different pain thresholds. Some can, and there could be some kind of blood disorder which prevents them from bleeding. I know that people do have a disorder when they cut their fingers, it gushes, they constantly bleed. So the other side of the scale is that they wouldn't bleed. I think the glitching stopped. I don't know. I don't know what's up with our camera tonight, folks. It doesn't usually. Glitch. So, what do you think, folks? What do you think of the witch trials? Do you think they were guilty? Do you think they were innocent? Obviously, as I say, there was between 4,000 and 6,000 people arrested and tortured, over the entire time of the witch trials. And out of some of them, I dare say there were some of them, but that were guilty. But I think there were others who were more kind of faith healers, used herbs. As I say, I don't know a lot about, the witchcraft stuff and the herbs and stuff. So I think a lot of these people might have been, what do you call them? They deal with all the herbs and stuff. If somebody in the chat can help us out with the name. I know I'm looking like a bit of an idiot tonight, folks. I do apologise. I think I'm having one of my off nights. I'm not too sure. But they did herbal medicines and stuff like that. So I think a lot of people maybe dealt in that. And then they were deemed as a witch as well because it simply wasn't understood. I think a fair amount was hearsay and a lot were misunderstood.
Yep.
Yeah, I not totally, Sam, yet again, anybody could say Wicca. Hi, Frankie, good to see you, buddy. Herbalist hippie. Possibly a herbalist. I deal with all the herbs and stuff, you know. But a fair amount was hearsay and a lot were misunderstood. There was some, as in that case with the 16-year-old boy accused of women. And as you say, hearsay, the old rumour mill as well, all it took was one person to say something out of place and the ball would start rolling. People would add on to the story, what have you. And before you knew it, you'd Satan living in your village, basically. And it could just be some innocent little woman.
Aye, like midwives as well. They were
Midwives
seen
as
as
well,
witches, and all they done was delivered a baby.
Midwives as well. But, I mean, you think of the torture that these poor people went through. And it wasn't just women, you know, men were, children as well. Children weren't immune. The problem was if a woman lived on their own, they would be witches. Exactly. That's another way, Frankie, as well. If you lived yourself, you were termed to be a witch, a spinster, then you were looked upon society that you weren't right, basically. There's so many different ways that you could be a witch. The name of a witch is a surefire way for a man to win an argument. They had at least one thing right. But I mean, you know, he is right, Andy, you're right what you're saying. Take the case of Alice Nutter. I know we're not talking about the Pendle witches, but Norfolk, the local magistrate, had stole land from Alice Nutter. Alice Nutter broke into the court and fought a battle legally and won against him. I'd got a land back and he was furious. He was absolutely fuming at this, and he just basically turned around and he accused her of being a witch. Mm-hmm. And he had young Alice Device, who he had groomed basically to give evidence. He persuaded her to give evidence against Alice, which she did, and Alice ended up, being hung as well. So, Andy, that is, you know, it was a surefire way for a man to. That's how he won it. That's how he won his land back, and that's how he gets revenge on Alice. Alice is probably case in point for hundreds, and that's it. Yep, exactly. I think that was the case and the point, because it had been made so easy to. I know we're breaking into Pendle now, and I do apologise, but you know.
I think it comes hand in hand though. You automatically talk about witches, so you automatically then go on to talk about Pendle.
Aye, well, as I was trying to stay clear of Pendle this week, you know, but as Sarah says, it goes kind of hand in hand. So I do apologise for drifting into the kind of Pendle area. It's not done on purpose. No, it's fine, buddy. It's fine. That's what, you know, as we always say, feel free to put any comments, nice comments, mind you, not rude ones. Rude ones, are you grounded for 5 minutes, regardless of who you are, grounded for 5 minutes for a rude comment. That is the rules. It's in the book. So any comments are welcome. Questions, and I'm quite happy to. If you're happy for Pendle, I'm happy for Pendle because we love Pendle. You know,
we do.
I would do. You can't help but love Pendle, but no, I was not. Where am I? Was probably case in point for hundreds in that situation. She was a case in point for that situation because it showed how easy it was for a totally innocent woman to end up at the end of a rope by just one man saying so, and him telling a child, I believe she was 12 years old, telling a 12-year-old, say she was a witch, tell her she was at the Good Friday meeting, and that's what she did. She stood up in the court and said she was at the Good Friday meeting, and bang, that was Alice, you know. Mm-hmm. She was taken outside and hung, basically. Very similar to the Salem witch trials also. It is very similar to them. We have Matt and Jennifer in on Wednesday. Yep. Our USA team, they're going to be covering the Salem witch trials. So they'll be doing that for you. The witches' well in Edinburgh symbolise good and evil, like the plant was used to heal.
But too much could kill.
Mhm.
Yep. There's Carol saying that she read a book called The Bridled Tongue about witchcraft in the 1500s through to the
1700s. Yeah, it says 1700s.
Aye.
But it was, we're not going to talk because somebody else is going to talk about that, the tongue thing. It was a brutal time to be living, and they didn't take any prisoners, pardon the pun. The way that they treated these people was just diabolical, but
Barbaric.
Unfortunately, that's just the way that they seen these people as evil. They seen them as a threat, and they blamed them for a lot. They blamed them for everything. Basically, their cattle dying, their crops failing, a family member falling ill. Something like that happened. They blamed the old spinster who lived in the woods, whatever.
With 5 cats.
With 5 cats, stuff like that. Hey, chaos, buddy.
But that is a misconception, though, that witches had lots of black cats. They just lived in the wee houses, wee crooked cottages with their crooked wee cats.
It is, but I think that's a lot of, it's kind of to do a lot of films about it, because through films have always been portrayed as, wee old, like I always think, as I said the other night, I was talking to Jennifer, the Snow White Witch.
Mm-hmm.
Or was it Forrest we were talking to, the Snow
Forrest.
White Witch? The wee old woman, black cloak, the rest of it, with no of an apple, but no, I think it's a sort of perceived image of these, but, I don't think there is an image of a witch, because I believe personally that all these people were innocent. They were good, good people at the end of the day. They might have dabbled in doing their herbs and stuff, might have fell out with their neighbours or friends, but at the end of the day, they were good people. I thought they were supposed to have gingerbread. Possibly that's
Hansel and Gretel.
Hansel and Gretel. That's that one. I can't comment on that one, Justin. Sorry. I've no read up on Hansel and Gretel in many, many years. We can check it out for you. You certainly check it out for you. And maybe do a live about it. What do you think? Do a Hansel and Gretel live.
I can't even remember the story of Hansel and Gretel.
She's going to Google that now. She's going to look that up.
Because I can't mind the story, so I'm going to Google it right now.
This is what I need to tolerate day in, day out. She Googles the world. You mention one thing and bang, she's on to Google straight away. It can be anything at all.
The story's quite long, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Aye, the woman had the gingerbread house with all the Smarties and everything on the front of it, and she coaxed the children in. Hans Christian Andersen, Hansel and Gretel. I think that's who wrote it. Let's see, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, gingerbread house. There you go.
I watched the movie.
You were right. You were spot on. You were absolutely spot on.
You're right with the herbs, as they used them as medicine similar to today.
Yeah, well, they're still, again, I say I'm not an expert on it, but I know, they are used still to this day. And, in many different aspects. We've got three witches coming on the panel on Saturday. And they'll be able to, certainly ask them about I know Natalie likes her herbs and stuff. She does all that kind of stuff. So, herbs, do you think the image of a witch
I just set that up.
comes from... Do you think the image of a witch comes from the fear of something different? A lot of people with deformities were labelled witches, so the image we see of a crooked nose, warts, maybe. That's a good point, Andy. Possibly, yeah. As you say, a lot of people back then did have a deformity of, some kind, whether it was a crooked nose or Anne Boleyn, an extra finger, or they walked with, a limp or something like that, or hunched over, what have you. Then I think that is quite a good point. I never thought that. That's where the image of the witch
So if I was born back then, I would have been executed. Charming.
Aye, possibly. Because, because you're disabled, you would have been seen as
A witch.
being a witch. But again, come the 17th century, King James VI started to sort of wake up and start to realise, well, maybe these people weren't what they seemed to be. And so Shelley saying Janet Horne was the last lady, and her daughter, Janet and her daughter were the last people to be executed. Janet Horne was the last person in Britain to be tried and executed for witchcraft in 1727. She and her daughter were arrested and jailed in Dornoch. According to her neighbours, her crimes according to her neighbours were devilish. She was accused of turning her daughter into a pony, of getting Satan to sell to shoe the girl, the horse. At the time of her execution, Janet Horne was showing signs of what would be recognised as senile dementia. There you go. I mean, some of these claims of these people that's charged with, shape-shifting, turning their daughter into horses and stuff like that. People did believe this back then. That's how strong the belief was in witchcraft and Satan and what have you. And so people did, you could tell them probably anything basically, and people would believe them. But there, as I say, senile dementia, which obviously back then nobody knew anything about. I can't remember which culture, if you were born left-handed, you were considered bad, maybe born of the devil and killed at birth.
So,
I'll nearly that one up. I'm just going to write on my wee. I've got my bits of paper here, as everybody knows, I always have my pad at my trusted side. So I'm going to look that one up because that's actually quite a good point with that one.
that is quite shocking. That it says our daughter appears to have had a deformity in her hands and feet, a condition which she is believed to have subsequently passed on to her son. The trial was rushed. Captain David Ross, Sheriff Deputy of Sutherland, found both women guilty and ordered they should be burned to death the following day. The younger woman escaped, but Janet was clearly confused by the events. She was stripped, covered in tar, and paraded through Dunlock in a barrow. When she arrived at her execution place, Janet is said to have smiled and warmed herself at the very fire which was about to consume her.
It's just,
And there's a stone that sits, I'll show you now, on the site of where Janet was burned.
what happened there?
Glitching.
And that's where she was executed. So she was tarred and put in a barrel
Yep.
and rolled through the town. It's just shows you the mentality. Frankie is left-handed, so if he's in future lives, keep an eye on him. Everybody, watch out for Frankie because he writes with his left hand. Thanks a lot. And there's no that Frankie, that will be noted, my friend. Just as saying, I think that's somewhere in the African continent, but I'll certainly have a wee look into that. So that's us just about on the hour, folks. At East Live this week, because we're on all week, East Live's going to be roughly about an hour. We hope you've enjoyed us tonight. I know it's been a bit of a mixed up first night, Go good to see Justin's comment. Left-handed, I'm not sure how he did this when he threw a ball and see how they could catch. Possibly, aye. You're loading up.
I'm looking up the left-handed thing.
Alright. Sarah's loading up the left-handed thing. But so while she's doing that, I'll just say, because we're on all week and Saturday, each live is going to just be an hour long. So tomorrow night we have, so there's Craig. Oh, that's Laura. Craig is Laura's husband. So Laura, watch out, doll. Watch out, we're just down the hill. We're just down the hill. You don't worry. Text and I'll send Sarah up. Right? She'll come up. She'll be fine.
Okay.
And you can let me know how you've got on. Between Carol's comment, between 50s and over 1,500 people were killed in Scotland being called a witch. At the same time, only 500 people were executed. It was, it was
Did you know there's an
hundreds and hundreds of
international?
people.
Did you know there's an international day that recognises left-handed people?
See where you started. See where you started.
They go Tuesday, August
Just
the 13th. People that's left-handed.
Recollection, I think they were buried alive. Not a good way to go. A good way to go. So anyway, folks, that's us for night one of our Witch Week. Sorry, it's been a bit muddled up. So back tomorrow night. There's so much more to paranormal than people realise. Love history and learning. Thank you, Justin. Well, there is this, as we always say, without history, you don't have the paranormal. And there's no point in looking into the paranormal if you don't know what's behind, what's happened in the past, and you go to locations, don't know what's happened there. And so history does play a major, major part in the whole kind of paranormal field. And, we're glad that people come in and they enjoy the history side of it. We do try and balance it out, we do try and balance the history with the paranormal. And I'm glad that you enjoy it. And
we try and bring the past to the present. Well, that's our logo, our slogan and stuff.
Okay, Smarty. Bringing past to present. Nothing but a bit of advertising, is there? Bringing past to present. I mean, it's good to prove your evidence. It's good to be able to back it up. There's too many people out there these days that put something up. I'm not going to name anybody. I never do. They'll put something up on their channel and say, right, this is X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. There you go. Believe it. But it's good to be able to put something up and say, well, here's the evidence behind it. This is what, this is what the history books say, and we never ever say, something is paranormal or this is the truth. We believe in saying to people, this is what we have found. This is what, we're seeing. What do you think? And so we believe in leaving it open to people to make up their, you need to let people make up their own minds. You can't decide for people. To me, decide that that's wrong. Everybody's got their own opinions. They'll have different views. Say different opinions on something. Let them express their opinions and views. Some might believe it, some might not. Everybody's an individual, and that's why we never ever claim to put, this is true, this is a ghost, this is black, because to me that's a load of bollocks. Excuse the French, all the ladies in the chat.
We just provide the facts and the evidence.
You need to just put the facts down, what you've found, and say, right, there you go, what do you think, end of story, and let the public decide, I enjoy very much. Thank you for the many talks. You're very welcome, Penny. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to see you in, doll. Have very much enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Carol. So tomorrow night, thanks, Sam. Tomorrow night, you are stuck with Sam and myself. Be warned. We're not going to tell you what the subject is. You need to find out tomorrow night. So that's a wee hook. That's to get people to come back. See if you say, we're not telling you what we're doing, but it's tomorrow night, then people start to, I'm going to go back and see.
You're on tech tomorrow with the clicky thing.
And I'm doing the clicky thing tomorrow night. I am on the PowerPoint, so if it screws up, I apologise ahead of time. Well, I've done okay with the Alcatraz one.
Yeah.
That worked. The Alcatraz one with Jennifer, I was quite happy with myself because the PC never blew up. So to me, that's always a bonus if your PC doesn't blow up, especially when I'm using it. You know what I mean? So tomorrow night we're back with Sam and
Penny is very
myself.
excited about that.
Go Sam, go Penny, yay! But just before we go, folks, I don't know if you've seen, we did put a post up on Facebook about the Cecil Hotel, which is quite a hot topic just now, especially on Netflix. And you also know we're connected to Patty Negri. We're very pleased to confirm Patty's given us a date. It's the 4th of March. Patty will be with us on a live, talking exclusively about the Cecil Hotel, who we all know she has hands-on experience. She's been there herself, and things have happened. So that's, I know it's a few weeks off, but I'm just putting that out there basically. I'll be just watching for the outtakes in. So it'll be 10 o'clock on. It's no my fault. Blame Scott. Everybody they blame me every time. Every time they blame me. So it's 10 o'clock on the 4th of March. Patty Negri will be on our channel talking about the Cecil Hotel. I had to plug that one there because I'm really. I've seen it on Netflix and it's brilliant. The documentary. No disrespect to the people what's happened to them, but it's absolutely brilliant. So Patty's going to be back. She's also back at the end of the month with Charlotte. We've got her and Charlotte coming back for a reunion at the end of the month. So they're back on the 27th, but we'll be posting up anyway. Anyway, folks, that's us for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night with Sam and my good self, and I'll try and not mess up the clicky thing. So thanks everybody for coming in, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and please stay safe until we see you tomorrow night. This Craig comes in right at the end. Evening, Craig. Goodbye, Craig. Thanks for coming in, buddy. You're a tad late, but it's okay. So everybody take care, and we'll see you tomorrow night.
Bye.
Bye.